Great, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning for what I think will be a really fun conversation. My name is Bryant, and I'm a partner with Tyton Partners. We're an advisory firm with investment banking and strategy consulting offerings focused entirely on the education market. I'm really excited today to be the moderator for this conversation, Beleaguered or Becoming Higher Education's Path Forward in the Next Decade. When I came up with that pithy title in the dark days of January, it seemed like a great topic starter, but here in sunny San Diego, it's feeling like a bit of a daunting scope for us to cover in only 40 minutes. But this is an awesome panel, and we're going to get it done. Right, guys? Yeah. Good. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists, and then we're going to jump right in. We have Barbara Mistick, who's the president of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities. We have Stephanie Khurana, who is the CEO of Axim Collaborative. We have Courtney McBeth, who is the Chief Academic Officer of Western Governors University. And we have Ted Mitchell, who's the president of the American Council on Education. So we're super excited to hear from all of you today and want to jump right into the conversation. So there's no shortage of evidence about the ways in which higher education is beleaguered today. It's having a moment of challenge. We have demographic challenges, completion metrics that have been stubborn to improve. We have financial challenges for large and small institutions, both public and privates, and a variety of challenging regulatory and policy dynamics that are emanating from both the left and the right, and well-covered sentiments of dissatisfaction from students and employers. So yeah, beleaguered might be an appropriate characteristic that summarizes some of those challenging dynamics. But we're going to sort through that long list to see if we might align on what's solvable. At the same time, higher education is becoming increasingly more nimble. So that becoming part is exciting too. We have the opportunity and evidence that the sector is becoming more responsive to serve new types of learners, more willing to adopt new forms of pedagogy supported by new technologies. So at the center of this beleaguered versus becoming tension, I think is really a question that I'd like to start our conversation with this morning, which is really about expectations. So in many respects, our sector reflects the broader challenges that we're facing today as a society. And so in one sense, like, should higher ed be the enabler of change, or is it going to just reflect some of these sort of systemic challenges that we face as a society? So it's a big question to get warmed up on, but I know we can jump right in. And so I'd like to start with Ted, if I could. With this question: what is the appropriate expectation or obligation of higher ed to serve learners, employers, and society at large? And how would you prioritize these three communities: learners, employers, and society at large? And then we can jump in and go from there. So Ted, could you lead us off with that question?
Sure, I'll try. I'll try even harder with the microphone.
It's on. You're good.
Are we good? Good. So sorry I was almost late. I was on the phone with the president of Columbia University, who is being grilled in Congress today. So we can talk about beleaguered from her point of view.
Yes.
But I'll leave that for later. So listen, I think the responsibilities for us in higher education are enormous, and I think that the fundamental issue facing American higher education is that we haven't been living up to them. We haven't been living up to any of those. We haven't been living up to our responsibility to students. The completion rates, I'm looking out at a lot of friends for a long time. Completion rates in American colleges and universities have been stagnant for 30 years. Think of all of the promises that we've made to each other over the last 30 years that we were going to have this thing that was going to help make a difference. Guess what? Here we are, we're still here. So we're not serving learners. We're not serving the traditional learners. And as we'll hear from Courtney later, we're just starting to emerge in ways that we can help, quote unquote, non-traditional learners. So that's one. Employers, there's been a growing disconnect between the world of the academy and the world of work. The most nimble and important institutions are closing that gap, but we're not close to that yet. And then finally, serving society, key to that has been making sure that higher education is a step or a step ladder to the American dream. And here too, we're stuck. We've had over 30 years of enabled affirmative action in this country. We're done with that now. But during that period, we didn't fundamentally change the identity of today's college student. So we lost 30 years of opportunity. We'll never get that opportunity back again. So we have to do that. So that's one. Two is we have completely lost sight. Sorry, bad day. We've completely lost sight of our responsibility to educate democratic citizens. That becomes an afterthought. There is no civics in K-12 anymore. Our students are coming to us from the most segregated neighborhoods ever. They're coming to us from the most segregated schools since Brown versus Board. And they're coming to us from a life in social media that silos their experience to only people who agree with them. Is it any wonder that our students don't have the muscles, the intellectual capacity, the habits of mind to be able to engage with each other on tough issues like Gaza and whether it's birth control, abortion, Gaza, you name it. So I think we're at a moment of reckoning, which is somewhere between beleaguered and becoming. And if we don't take this moment seriously, I'm worried that beleaguered is going to be the order of the day. But I'm incredibly hopeful that this conversation will be a part of us all becoming.
Can I go to the other side of this? I will be optimistic to Ted's pessimism and say that, walking across the room this morning just to join you in the green room, I heard somebody say, the reason I love being in this sector is because I see students change. I see the transformational nature of higher education, and it inspires me. I heard that from somebody at one of these tables over here on the right this morning. And I think that is true. I think people hold that at the heart of this. If we serve learners appropriately, then learners are better members of society. And we have all sorts of proof of that. It's not just that learners earn more money. We know that that is generally true, given that college graduates earn on average $1.2 million more, contribute back to our economy, back to our society via increased taxes on a regular basis. We also know that employers like to hire college graduates because they're looking for critical thinkers and problem solvers. They're not just looking for the current need of the workplace, but they're looking for this long-term career person. And so what we're doing is really preparing people for careers. And for careers today, the Department of Labor Statistics says on average you'll have 12 jobs across your career. So we're not just preparing our learners for that first job, but we're preparing them to contribute for a very long time. And then their contributions to the society are greater civic participation, greater voter rates for college graduates than for non-graduates, lower unemployment rates, more participation in volunteer activities at about 25% more than those who were just high school graduates. So there is tremendous value to a college degree. There is tremendous economic benefit to our society at large, and our society needs an engaged and educated workforce. So, I think those are the positive aspects. Are there challenges? Oh, yes. There are definite challenges. Would I say that, we're beleaguered and disappearing? No, absolutely, 100% not.
So, and I would agree, Barbara, I think there's no question of the value. I think where we need to be thinking about is how to serve all students and honor that there's talent everywhere and provide models that provide access and persistence, completion, and workforce relevance. So I'm actually this is a great spot to be because my first so I've been at WGU 100 days, and I'm thinking about one of the most quintessential moments of my career was sitting on stage with Ted at my first WGU commencement, which was in Anaheim, California. We have 6 commencements a year throughout the country. And Ted, we gave Ted an honorary degree in honor of his more than 3 decades of experience. And what I saw looking out at the WGU student population, there were 10,000 people between the audience and the students. And in our School of Technology, we have more than 30,000 students in cybersecurity programs. And as Ted and I are sitting there in the Anaheim Arena, we're graduating our students. More than 50% are first-generation college students, and 62% of the students were students of color coming out of the School of Technology. To me, I sat there and thought, thank you. I thought back to all those employers that I've had conversations with that said, Courtney, how do we hire diverse talent into technology? Where are they? They're at WGU because we've provided an affordable, flexible, and personalized pathway that's very workforce relevant. And that's what we need to be thinking about, because talent is everywhere, and we need to ensure we have models to honor that and help students complete relevant degrees, be democratic citizens, and be ready to work in the workforce.
Well, and I think, building off of this question of where are we in terms of beleaguered versus becoming, and this idea that it's just happening too slowly. And I think when you look at where innovation is happening and where it's happened in other sectors, higher education has not moved at the pace it needs to move in order to reach the students who could benefit most. And when we look at what those innovations have been, and even starting with the MOOCs was going to be a big revolution in terms of thinking about how do we have more access to courses. Well, it turns out that's not enough, and I think that's one thing that we're focused on at Axim, is thinking about how do we not just think about the students who are getting courses, but who needs them most, like the students who are in the broad access institutions and inclusive pathways, and that's over 14 million in this country. There's 1 million at the selective schools and probably a little bit less than 1 million in the online universities. And so what about everybody else who could benefit from the innovations of technology, and thinking about how do you catalyze change, not just in the classroom, but with the supports to the classrooms and the connections to the careers, and how can we innovate more broadly, and how can we do it faster? Because this problem can't wait, and as a society, we can't wait in order to solve it. And I think that's really where we could be becoming, and maybe AI can help be a great equalizer, but not if we don't focus first on the students who could benefit most.
So you're going to hate this, but can I?
Go, and then we're going to move to the next one. Go ahead.
So I think what you're hearing, believe it or not, is that Barbara and I agree that if you're looking under a street lamp at the people who are illuminated by that lamp, who go to four-year residential institutions, other institutions, we're succeeding wildly. The problem is that that street lamp doesn't illuminate the America that we're growing into. And so what we're talking about is how can we innovate in ways that are hospitable to the new student or the renewed student, and will probably lead to some disruption and some positive innovation under the street lamp as well. We look back at Clay Christensen. This is his model, right? Is that disruption and innovation happen in underpopulated markets for adult students, for adult learners, for career changers, et cetera. And that is happening everywhere, and it's very, very exciting. Growing that and helping to build bridges into the traditional college sector, that's the challenge of becoming.
So if I could build on a couple of the comments that have been made so far around the path out of the beleagueredness, let's start with the solvable problems for the student, for the learner. And Stephanie, I'd like to ask you to start here. You said it's speed, it's pace of change that's sort of frustrating, I think, at this point in time. So pick one problem, pick a student problem. Let's just talk about it for a few minutes around how do we convert that from the problem that is today to something that's solvable.
Yeah. So, I often think about what's the unit of change, and oftentimes students do help drive change, and students in combination with faculty members to think about what kinds of innovations do I need. And I think there's a lot of things that can be done in terms of how we're designing in the classrooms, whether it's how we're delivering courses through hybrid pathways, connections between high school and college. How do you actually think about ways to drive those innovations at the student level that help improve outcomes? I think there's opportunities to actually think more about a student-facing view of what's needed. So if we think about in healthcare, 15 years ago, there was no such thing as a patient portal that you could actually get your information on and see your own lab tests, your own records. And why can't we do that for students? Why can't we have a more ubiquitous way to look at how am I doing and progressing on my path that I want to actually pursue, whatever pathway that is, whether it's a four-year residential pathway, whether it's a work-based pathway, and actually have the student drive their trajectory with the right types of advisings and supports that then connect to jobs that they know will earn value for them and the families that they have. And so I think the students need to be at the center of that innovation. But that's not enough, because that can often happen only at an institutional level. We have to really think about the systems level now, and what can we do as states and community members to connect these broken pathways and silos between the high school, the post-secondary, and the work. And until we bridge those silos with the student in mind, it's going to be very hard to break through this problem.
I think there's actually been a fair amount of progress that's happened on opening multiple pathways to students. So as Gates mentioned, I work with the independent sector, and that independent sector is 1,700 institutions across the United States. Actually, we have member institutions in 393 congressional districts, so that gives you some sense of the scope. I really like to say that America is a nation of college towns, and we represent those college towns. So we have, large research universities, we have specialty schools of art and design, conservatories of music, the whole gamut, historically black colleges and universities, all that are serving students in very different ways. So just last week, I was on two campuses, one that was building a CHIPS center and doing lots of interesting research, another one that was building a nuclear reactor that was going to connect to healthcare purposes. So when I wander around, I see so much innovation on campuses. I think it's hard to get a sense of that globally because there's just so much noise out there today. Ted and I, we get the great privilege of working very regularly with the Secretary of Education and the Department of Education, sometimes on good outcomes and sometimes on not so good outcomes. We'll go into that one later.
We have a FAFSA form right here if anyone wants to fill it out.
We won't go there this morning, but maybe we will. But one of the things that we've worked on that I think has been illuminating has been transfer pathways for students. So, it's interesting to me that we have had vibrant transfer pathways from community colleges to four-year institutions for 40 years. And some states have spectacular programs. I think one of the difficulties for us is they're not universal state by state. And so we have so much differentiation in the system overall. But, in our own sector, I think we work very hard to be the best that we can be. So our completion rates in the independent sector are the best in the ecosystem. Folks really are committed to working with learners and making sure that they're delivering in a way, whether it's an adult learner or a student learner, in a way that is accessible to that learner, accessible to that community. And so there are lots of ways that we should unify these systems across the country and find the best practices that are working in various states and be able to distribute them. So I don't think we should lose the individual nature of what we do, because students learn in different ways. Learners have different styles of learning, and the diversity of our system is the gem of the U.S. system of higher education, and we have to hold on to that.
So I'm hearing so far, we got a universal degree plan approach, if I may, just summarize it briefly. We've got better transfer mobility systems and policies in place. Courtney, do you want to add to the list of problems you want to tackle for the student?
Sure, and I love this student-focused perspective here. So maybe I'll just mention two additional things on a very sort of pragmatic, student-centered level, which is, one is personalization. What does personalization mean in terms of the enrollment experience? So when someone lands on our website, we want to be able to understand who they are, where are their strengths, what do they need to work on, and put them on the best and most low-risk path to succeed. And then once they get in the learning experience, using technology, a combination of high-touch human supports, both in mentoring and coaching and at the course instruction level, to really personalize that learning experience. So the human dimension, but also we're building the AI-assisted human dimensions and a way to provide a level of personalization to ensure that all students that come in can succeed, and using that predictive modeling to really help us do that. So that's the really that need of personalization and adaptation. And then, Barbara, I loved what you said in terms of like what evidence-based practices work that we can scale. Work-based learning, experiential learning is one of those strong evidence-based practices that we know does work. The problem is scale. So we are thinking hard about that, of what is the spectrum of the 3 to 5 types of work-based learning that we can then embed in our curriculum, make sure that it's part of the experience, scaled apprenticeships, and using that as a real lever and evidence-based practice at scale to ensure student success for everyone.
Courtney, do you think that vision, or how might that vision apply to institutions of all shapes and sizes, do you think?
I think this is a dimension where higher ed and we need all sorts of, just to be clear, we need our R1s, we need different size and types of institutions and that market differentiation. Institutions have built up very complex alumni engagement centers, very complex advancement structures, very complex government relations, all understandable. Why haven't we built up employer engagement functions in the same way to better connect? So there's some fundamental elements of how we built our institutions that it's no wonder we feel this disconnect from employers, and it's tough to get their input into our curriculum. It's tough to create this connection to clinicals and internships and practicums. And so those are some of the just inherent, at the very institutional level, elements that make it challenging.
Okay, so we've put some problems out there that are mostly student focused that we might think about working to solve, that are solvable across the next decade. Let's talk about how those solutions to those problems might sort of predict what we think the sector is becoming. At my opening comments, I talked about some characteristics we might like to see in the sector going forward, and have some evidence that it's happening even today, is responsive, nimble, ready for experimentation for the purpose of improvement. As a sector, you know, even as a system, we might think about what does a growth mindset look like for the system as a whole. And so in order to build that muscle, what do you all think we would need to put on the list of things that the sector should be becoming in the short to medium term here? And so, Barbara, let's start with you. And I know we'll have some different points of view about this because the sector is just not monolithic.
Well, I think there are 3 real challenges for our overall ecosystem and for our sector as well today, and those are around access, they're around affordability, and they're around accountability. And those are all very fair challenges for our sector. One of the things that I think would make a difference in terms of what we could become is we could have better access for students by really having a focus on increasing the kind of student aid that will really help students. So we started several years ago, and Ted and I actually co-chairs at that time something called the Student Aid Alliance, a double Pell initiative to really increase Pell grants because they haven't kept pace with inflation over the last 50 years. We tend to start these government programs and then we just don't focus on them year after year. They don't have the same inflationary increases, and so they lose value for students. And I believe that part of the issue around being this beleaguered sense is because there is a general sense in the public that a college education is not affordable. So it's not accessible, it's not affordable, we're not open access institutions. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think we do, particularly in our sector, we want to be open access, we want to be affordable. But there are challenges to that. There are challenges in the changing demographics of students today. There are challenges in the number of low-income students that we serve. It might be interesting for all of you to know that the private sector, the independent sector, 38% of our students across the sector are Pell-eligible students. The public sector, it's 40%. So we're on par in each of those pieces of the ecosystem in serving students. So I think what could really make a difference would be a collective effort to double something like the Pell Grant, so that when students who want to access this experience and want to be active contributors to our society and to our economy, that they're not leaving with a huge amount of debt. And then, you know, part of the, I don't want to get started in this because I would take up the rest of your time, but the student debt crisis has been it's not just about the cost of attending college, it's been about the way that Congress set the interest rates and compounded interest over time. So it's so interesting to me. I just was at a dinner the other night and folks said, I don't understand how this is going on. And so I don't understand why these debt numbers got so high, and is it just because of what colleges are charging? And it's not. It really is because of this policy to compound interest over time. So it's the complexity here is great, and I think if we can parse this apart, we could actually have an undergraduate degree that you could access and leave without debt if we had something like a doubling of the Pell Grant. So I just, if you can, I have 1 second, if I could just ask for a show of hands, those of you who have had a Pell Grant in the room. I'm always astounded by the number of hands that go up every time I ask this question. And what we really need to do is to gather together. So we, in our coalition today, we have over 40 different organizations that are participating. We need more. It's a website, studentaid.org. You can take a look at that, or just Google Double Pell. That'll get you there. It has a Contact Congress link, but it is going to take collective action that is much greater than what the sector can do to provide the kind of access and affordability.
So thank you. Big vote for affordable. That's a characteristic that needs to be clear on for the sector going forward. Ted, can I put you on the spot and ask you to speak to how the sector needs to become more accountable?
Outcomes.
And how might we do that? I mean,
So for about 200 years, higher education has operated sort of with its own internal gyroscope, and it's understood its outcomes to be the ones that both Barbara and I talked about with slightly different valence. Community service, active democratic citizens, liberally, small l, liberal thinkers, taking in all points of view and coming to a conclusion, critical thinkers, people who can communicate and solve problems, and, oh, by the way, people who have qualities of leadership and aspiration and can help drive the country forward. Those are great outcomes. They aren't really measurable in any tangible way, and so we've started to slide our way into conversations about what outcomes should we measure. I think we should measure all of the the aforementioned ones, but which outcome measures can we actually get our hands on? Those turn out to be economic outcomes. And so you have, every third person that I run into has got an ROI index of American colleges and universities. That's one, and it's a very crude measure of outcomes. But that's about all we've got. Congress has proposed a number of different ways of holding institutions accountable. One that will go into effect next year is a bright light accountability that will ask every institution, and Barbara and I are busy trying to get the federal government to delay the implementation of this because our institutions have other things to do, like getting students aid. But it will measure the economic outcomes of graduates of every program of every college in America. So that's a kind of accountability. We're working on a system-wide accountability system that came from the Carnegie Classification of Higher Education. For how many of you is that the first time you've ever heard those words in combination? Oh, good. So we know that Carnegie Classification System has been the way that institutions have marked themselves. Unfortunately, they have associated quality with some categorical distinctions. So R1 seems to be what everybody wants to be when they grow up. And that's only, R1 is really important. It's a research designation. It says you do a lot of research. It doesn't say whether that's any good or not. It doesn't say whether students graduate. It doesn't say who your students are. It just says you do a lot of research. And so we're switching the Carnegie classification system to now measure social and economic mobility. So every institution in the land will be gauged on and categorized according to the social and economic mobility of its graduates. That's accountability.
And in order for that accountability to be effective, there needs to be consequences, there needs to be impact as it relates to performance, overperformance, or underperformance. So what are your all's views about how that should play out?
Well, so the Carnegie classification system is the plumbing for everything from U.S. News and World Report to the way federal funding agencies assign funding to grant applicants, to the way that states who have performance-based funding metrics allocate state funds, and my favorite, it's the way collegiate sports associations, conferences, allow people in and out. So, you know, this could have major repercussions on name, image, and likeness. I'm hoping that I get to be the beneficiary of that. Come on, that was funnier than that. But as we change the plumbing, we will change the behavior of philanthropists and states and the federal government. And that then will create new incentives for institutions to build systems that really do support bringing in a broad spectrum of students and graduating them in place on time with employment.
And are you going to go for your name or your image or your likeness? Which one?
Image would really always be bad, and likeness equally, so I'm just going with the name.
Yeah.
TED has a really resonant thing to it. There's a logo. I'm going to push
You're
this.
going for it. Stephanie, you want to jump in?
Well, I think, you know, it's the incentives that come from the top, and then you think about how do you then build the capacity within the institutions in order to deliver against it in ways that are actionable. And a lot of these institutions are so under-resourced. I mean, when you're talking about all the different departments and programs, a lot of schools don't have any of that. There's no institutional research capability. There's very limited IT capability. There's very limited ability to take data that even exists, like CAST data or others, and to make use of it. And so I think that's another area of investment that's also we can innovate around. How do we use capacity building and shared resources to do across multiple campuses? I'm seeing Ed out there for UNCF that does the capacity building. There's other ones that do it across community colleges. And so I think that we have this opportunity to use the incentives and then design the systems and the technologies and the human capabilities to then be able to share more resources and thinking about how do we allocate these scarce resources across the institutions in ways that actually deliver the outcomes that we want with the people who are driving it, whether it's the students, the faculty, the administrators, the employers. And it's a chance to kind of reimagine what's possible in terms of how that happens. It's a catalyst. And, you know, I think about if somebody told me, you know, in the early 1900s that, you know, you could get to California in 6 hours, and all you knew about was a car and maybe a train. And you'd be like, no way, that's just not possible. You can't get to California in 6 hours. And because we didn't imagine what planes were. And I think we are in that, we have to imagine we're in that moment of thinking about what could we be if we think about the problems and break it apart and put it back together with a little bit of ingenuity, because we can't invent it from scratch. We want to take advantage of what exists. And how can we actually think about how change can happen and how it can happen in a transformative way for our students and happen faster.
The only thing that we can't do is to measure this success by the very first job that a student takes. And that's, one of the things that that the department is looking at now. And I think that is very short-sighted. Last night I had a conversation with one of the sponsors here, an attorney who told me his first degree was in art and design, and he's now a lawyer at a firm, and how concerned he was for art and design schools. It was interesting to me when the Secretary of Education, Secretary Cardona, announced this plan about measuring success for your first job out of school, when and looking at the salary differential and salary differentials in states, and then the very next day talking about the fact that we need more teachers in the nation, and many teachers wouldn't meet the metric of the salary that you'd need to have in that first job out to not be in a low-value program. So we have to be very careful as a society that we don't decide based on a very short-term perspective, something that is a very long-term benefit. What we're doing is creating lifelong learners who will learn a living over their lifetime, and we can't measure that the minute they get out of school.
So we're winding down on our time here, and so the next 4 minutes, we're going to cast a vision for the future. So we can get this done, I'm confident. Predicting the future is a little bit of a tricky business. I like this quote that all prophecies about the future are signposts pointing into the fog. So I think we do this with a certain measure of humility. I find it actually helpful to look back a little bit if you need to look forward. And so would we have predicted in 1997, when Western Governors was founded, that it would grow to serve hundreds of thousands of learners today in a really unique learning model? And so, Courtney, can you take just a minute or so to speak to how the conditions that created WGU have in turn catalyzed growth over the last 20 plus years, and what might that tell us about the road ahead, do you think?
Sure. Well, our current leadership gets to stand on the shoulders of visionary giants like Mike Leavitt and Governor Romer of Colorado. We had at that time a new technology, the internet, and 2 visionary governors and a handful of more that really took that state-based approach from the top down to say we need to think differently about how to deliver higher education. And then also there was this innovation mindset, and I think early on we had to be really scrappy. We didn't have all the money there to figure this out. And so sometimes that's another way to kind of think about what we were talking about earlier, where resources flow is sometimes you can be more innovative when you have to be scrappy and think differently about things. So I think we are at this moment of what's going to happen with AI? How do we leverage that to be this next frontier? To imagine how it can improve what we're currently doing to make our learning and our student journeys more personalized and adaptable. But we also need to be imagining what can the future be, and that's what we're trying to do at WGU, is keep that innovation mindset to say, let's continue to improve what we're currently doing, but also cast that vision of what is the next future of providing the most affordable, flexible, personalized, adaptable learning experience that creates great citizens and ones that can get jobs and that can continue that earning trajectory. And I think what's maybe unique for us to think about is we've primarily served working learners with some college and no degree, and we are increasingly having more first-time college students, younger, rising talent come to us. So it's imperative upon us now at our scale with hundreds of thousands of students to think about how do we provide that not equal to but equivalent experience to an on-campus experience to create that social dynamic, the engaged citizen in a digital setting that can really set up society for what we need to have a thriving families and communities and society. And so I think it comes down to sometimes the scrappiness, thinking outside the box, being innovative, and WGU is based on strong gubernatorial leadership to help give the state pressure from the top and then the innovation from the grassroots. So we need grass tops and roots.
Some signposts there to be thinking about for the future. In the minute we have left, I'm just wondering if we could quickly go down the line and say what's one signpost that you think is pointing us toward what the future would look like. So Ted, can we start for you? What's your signpost?
Sure. Credit for prior learning. We've talked about transfer. but I want to expand that to talk about all the ways in which people learn and all the different portfolios of learning experiences that people bring forward. I think that the signpost for me of the future is that people will bring lots more of those experiences to us in traditional higher education and ask us to give them credit for it. I think we need to. I think that needs to be deliberate. There need to be guardrails around it. But in the same way that you wouldn't want to eat all of your lunch for the rest of your life in one restaurant, I don't think that you're going to want to collect all of your education for the rest of your life at one institution.
Could we jump to Stephanie and then to Barbara real quick?
Sure. So my signpost is connected pathways. There's no reason why we can't keep losing students from high school to post-secondary to work, and that those are clear digital pathways that students can feel they can see themselves in their own future, see themselves succeed, and where every student has a path and has a path where they believe they can succeed. And I think with that, we'll have a society that is brimming with hope and with harmony.
I'd say keep the student and the learner at the center of everything that we do. And if we do that, we can recognize that the diversity of our ecosystem is really our strength, and we can support that diversity long term.
Excellent
Can
concluding
I
statement.
get 20
Sure, go ahead.
seconds? My signpost is, and I'm looking at many of you out here, we have amazing, innovative leaders in all of our institutions. So the more that there's market pressure and those levers of accountability for them to be able to move their institutions where they need to go, I feel a lot of hope on that front, because we have amazing higher ed leaders that want to do well by the student. So we need to help them get there.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for a great conversation.